think I'm going to build a Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Chimera, but with a difference. It's going to have wheels. Hey, I'm John. Thanks for joining me for this video today. Now, the Chimera is a tracked armored personnel carrier, and it's a pretty cool looking vehicle. I've actually built one of these previously. When I first got into doing sci-fi, the Chimera was one of the first, if not the first. No, it was the second. It was the second Warhammer kit I built, and I really enjoyed it. So I wanted to do another one, this time for video, but I thought I'd do a little bit of a different twist on it. What I'll be using on this model is a resin set from Blood and Skull Industries LLC, and I'll have a link down below to their eBay store. But they sell a lot of really cool resin parts, upgrade kits, variant kits, all sorts of stuff for various Warhammer vehicles. And when I saw this 6-wheeled version to convert the Chimera, I thought I got to build that one. Now, the set comes with just these two sides, which are a direct replacement for the tracked sides of the vehicle, and these wheels. Now, obviously, you can see I've started cleaning up some of them, but there is a little cleanup needed. Just like any plastic part, they're going to have some kind of mold block or sprue connections. Whoever did the casting on this, they probably cast several wheels at a time, and so there's going to be these cleanup points. But just as with any plastic model kit, the cleanup is not difficult. Now, if you've never worked with resin before, there are a few things that you'll need to be aware of. One of the biggest things is that you'll have to give each of the parts a good scrub in soapy water, because there may be some of the agent that they put inside the molds that helps the piece come loose from the mold. So you definitely want to give all of the parts a good scrub in warm soapy water, not hot water, because you don't want to warp the part. Also, you'll see there's a little pink area right there. That's actually part of the mold that came out with the part, and that's normal too. And you'll want to use, I use the tip of a needle just to clean out stuff like that, but you'll want to look around for any of the mold that might have come out with the part. Now, another part that I ordered from them also was this alternate turret, which has kind of a World War II look to it, and I thought it would be a cool variation on the very angular and square turret of the Chimera. It comes with a couple of little parts that allow you to use the various gun barrels that are in the kit's parts itself, and this just works as an adapter so that you can plug them in here, and then once cleaned up, you can stick this in here and use any of the weapons that come in the kit. There's also some turret parts that fit into the turret here, and there's a hatch cover for it and everything like that. However, I'm going to plan on using the crewman, so I'm going to modify the kit part so that it will work in there, and use the crewman and the gun mount and everything like that. So one of the great things about these kinds of resin kits is it allows you to just mix and match parts, really come up with your own unique variant. You could get other resin sets and put on top of it. You could get parts from other kits and put on it. So there's an almost endless variety of things you can do with these resin sets. Now, the first thing I'm going to do to get these parts prepared for assembly, which is what I'm going to cover in this video, is getting the hull completely assembled and ready for paint. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wash these parts in some warm soapy water. I'm going to do that off camera, and get any mold release agent off of them, and then go into some tips on cleaning up the various parts. I use a big plastic tub and I pour in some hot water. Now, it's not boiling hot, of course. It's coming right out of the tap. I guess you'd call it bath hot. And I just put in some dish soap. Regular dish soap will do. Nothing fancy is needed. And I just stir it around to make sure the water is really good and soapy and ready to clean the parts. And then I just dump the parts in. I don't leave anything out. Don't set anything to the side. I just dump them all in there, and I give them time to soak for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, making sure the water's still warm. I don't want to leave them there for a long time. Then I just get an old toothbrush and I start scrubbing them. Now, it's real important when I do this that I take time on each part to fully scrub it and get in all the little nooks and crannies to make sure that that mold release agent has been removed. And then I wash it off, rinse it off in warm water, because you don't want the soap staying on there either. That can interfere with the adhesion of paint. And I just set it off to dry to one side and grab the next part and continue doing that until I get all the parts washed. Now when I'm finished, I like to strain the water that I've been using, the soapy water, through a strainer, because you never know if you might accidentally leave something in the water and you don't want that going down into the sink. All right, once the resin pieces are washed, it's time to start working with them. And here I need to pause for a moment, because I would be remiss if I did not do this, and give a very strong safety warning. Resin, in terms of painting it, carving it with a knife, weathering it, all of those things we normally do, no big deal. Once it's primed, you just treat it like it's a piece of plastic. But unlike plastic, if you start sanding this stuff and start breathing in, because it makes a very fine dust when you start sanding it, that stuff is nasty. I'm talking put you in the hospital nasty. I was reading just the other day on Facebook on a modelers group. I wish I would have followed up with a guy to one, to see if he was okay, but two, just to get a little more information for this video. But a guy posted he was sanding on some resin and wasn't wearing any kind of breathing protection, and it put him in the hospital. So working with resin in terms of cleanup is a no-joke thing. But there are several things that we can do, I can do, you can do, we all can do, to make sure that we do it in a safe way. One of the things that I always do is I try to get as much cleanup done as possible with my nippers and my knife. You can get an awful lot of cleanup done with just these two. These don't produce dust. These are going to be much safer in terms of your cleanup. And the resin generally is much easier to work with a knife than plastic is. It's generally harder and a little more brittle, but it will generally, depending on the type of resin that the manufacturer used, will carve easier. Now you have to be careful with that, but I try to do the bulk of my cleanup with these two tools right here. Now when it comes to using the sanding sticks, and there will be places that you will need to use sanding sticks, you always, always, always want to wet sand. And by that, I mean you take a sanding stick, doesn't matter what grade it is, this is a 180, but whatever grade you're using, you want to dip that in water and then begin sanding. You want to sand slower. You don't want to do it fast so that stuff starts flying around. If you sand it, if you keep everything wet, the dust will clump together and you can clean it up easier. It won't be floating around in the air. But you definitely want to wet sand everything. Now the final safety thing that I'll say, and this is one that I will say is an absolute must. Don't work with resin if you don't have this. And that's a real respirator. Not just those little masks that we wear now because of COVID, but an actual respirator. Something that's going to filter out any of that resin, and is going to make sure you're not getting any of it in your lungs. It's going to be sealed against your face. It's going to keep everything out. So there is no substitute for this. It is this. It's not, okay, well, I'm outside and there's plenty of air. Nope. I've got an extractor booth. Nope. All of those things are fine. Go ahead and do those anyway. Wear one of these. Your lungs and your family will thank you. Now, to get back to the more practical side of modeling, you will need to do some assembly of the hull prior to mounting the resin pieces on. If you build this kit right out of the box, you build up this hull assembly, and then you build the 2 track pieces for either side, and they just simply glue on the side. Well, the resin is designed to fit perfectly right here. So you'll need to do this assembly before you start putting the sides on. This builds up into a fairly solid unit. The only modification I had to do was this upper hull part here was one piece, and it had some extensions that went down here. Those extensions were slightly warped and they pushed out, and rather than try and bow the plastic in, I found it was easiest just to snip those off right there, and then I just glued everything together here at the back portion, and it made for a really solid assembly. Now, your kit may not have that warpage right there. If it doesn't, just leave it as it is, and it'll work just fine. Now, another thing to note, there are these guns that go here on each of these positions. Now, the way they're designed to be put in, I think, is you slide them in from underneath, and then there's a backing piece that goes underneath them right here to hold them in. And it's just a flat piece like this. It's got these indents right here. That's the part that faces up. Now, I didn't want to have these in for the painting and the weathering because I was concerned that they would get in the way a little bit, and I wanted to put them in later. So what I have done is I have tested if I can glue this in place, and I'm going to hold it real firmly right there in the middle. I can very gently pop that into it and then glue it later. So what I'm going to do in preparation of putting on the sides is I'm going to glue this piece in right there, and I'm going to give it plenty of glue on there and make sure it's good and solid, because the last thing you want to happen is once you have the sides on and everything's closed up, you don't want to put your gun in like that and have it drop through, because it's going to be the devil to get that thing out of there. But that's my plan for assembling the hull in preparation for putting the sides on. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to parts cleanup, I try to use my sprue cutters and my hobby knife to do the bulk of the work, because you can get a lot cleaned up with just those two. Going in here and just shaving away some of that plastic or some of the resin like this. And you see that's making a little bit of dust, but it's large pieces of dust. It's not floating in the air, it's not flying around. And you can just clean these up like that. The larger places like this, you can just work your knife back and forth. Now, if you're horrified that I'm cutting towards myself, I understand that. It's probably not the best way to do it, but it's hard to do it cutting away from yourself. And I am bracing my thumb against it, and it is living a bit dangerously because I'm bracing it right against the blade. But you just carve that away until you get it as close as you can to being good. And if you work carefully, most of the cleanup can be done just with your hobby blade. It takes a while, but I think it's much safer. And then if you need to do some final buffing just to get everything smoothed down, that's when you go in with your wet sanding. And I'm not going to do that on camera because I'll have to have my mask on, and I don't know that, I need to demonstrate wet sanding because it's pretty much, it is what it says it is. But just taking caution in cleaning up this resin will keep you healthy and will get everything looking good so that we can start priming and painting and getting it on the model. All right, I'm getting to the moment of truth when I need to start gluing big parts onto big parts. Now, the inside of the resin parts have these shapes here that align to the inside of the model. That's just like if you were using the kit's tracks. They have the same shape on the inside. That's why this system works so well. But it helps you line up that bottom, and once you have the bottom lined up, the top looks pretty good. Now on my parts there is just a little bit of the part's not completely flat, but it's close enough that I'll be able to glue it down and it'll hold. Now if your part is warped more than that, whether it's this kit or any other kit, if it's warped more than this, you're going to want to put it under some in some hot water, let it soften up just a bit, and then put it back on the kit and hold it in place while it dries, while it cools off. And when you do that, the part should be shaped in a much better way so that you don't have to deal with a lot of that warpage. Because if a severely warped part, if you try and super glue that down, it's going to be pulling against that super glue. And if you glue two things together, let's say I'm put a dot of super glue here on this finger and I glue this finger this way. Once it's dry, if I try to pull apart in this direction, super glue holds really well. But if you're talking about shear force, this way or that way, it doesn't always hold as well. And so if you've got a lot of stress on the part and you've got super glue in there and then you're holding it when you're weathering it and doing stuff, I've had times when I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing and I got a little too far outside the envelope of when you could glue something. And let's say I'd be dry brushing across this, and just that process of dry brushing would cause enough stress that the part that was warped would pop, and I'd have to re-glue it after appropriate paratrooper words. But I guess that would be inappropriate paratrooper words. Anyway, so be aware when you're gluing this, stuff like this, about warpage on the parts. You want to reduce the warpage as much as possible. Okay, for my glue, I'm using this Gorilla Glue. Nothing special about it. It's good glue. I mean, that's the brand I've used for years, but there's plenty of other glues. I can't speak. Good glues. But I do like the thick glues. I'd prefer those over the thin glues, especially for this type of gluing. It's good to have both around because there are times when the thin stuff, you need it to flow into things, and that works really well. But I like this thicker glue. One tip on using super glue, it's always not always, but sometimes it's a struggle to keep the lid clean. What I do is after I pour out my super glue, when I use a bathroom towel like this and just pour out a puddle of super glue on it, after I get finished pouring it out, I tap it like that, and that lets the glue start flowing back down inside. And then I take a piece of paper towel and I clean off the tip and I let it sit like that for a couple of minutes. Super glue doesn't dry except where there's heat and pressure. It takes a long time to dry otherwise. So by doing it this way, I can let everything flow back down inside, and then when I put the lid on, it doesn't get gunked up. That's how my lid looks all the time. It stays relatively clean. I don't have to drill it out. I don't have to cut it down. I don't have to do anything with it. I just keep doing that all the time. Now, this stuff is kind of stringy, so just be aware of that. I use a toothpick to apply it. And what I'm going to do is just put it along the edge here in dots. I've found that if I try to just flood the surface with it, if a little super glue is great, a lot of super glue is super great. I found that's not always the case. So what I do is I put it in blobs along here, and when I squish it together, which I want to do here in a minute, I've found that distributes it better, and I get a better join than if I try to completely cover the surface with it. Now I apologize if this is a bit wonky as far as the camera view goes, but I'm trying to watch what I'm doing, because once I start applying this, the super glue will start setting and I need to move quickly. Okay, there. Now what I did is I'm making sure the alignment on the bottom is good, because my test fitting shows that if the bottom is aligned, then the upper parts will be aligned well. So I'm holding it, I'm gripping fairly hard. I'm gripping it, I'm pushing it together on the bottom and the top. And I'm going to do it long enough to allow that, that glue to set. All right, I have both sides glued on, and I'm going to give it a little bit of time with these rubber bands on to hold everything together and let it dry a little more. Super glue dries fast, but I think it needs a little more time to cure and just make a real good solid fit. So I'm going to let it sit this way for, maybe an hour or so. All right, I went ahead and just dry fitted these wheels on. I'm actually going to leave them off until the very end so that I can weather and paint them separately. But I've set the turret in place. And you can see I used the kit turret ring for to mount onto the resin turret, so I'd be able to put there's a large machine gun that's going to go here later on in the process, and I've got the figure here and the hatch temporarily in place. I used a gun from the spares box, a bigger gun than comes with the kit, because I just thought it looked a little better like this, but there's obviously still work to do, priming and all of that. But I just wanted to get a look for the end of this video, just to kind of show how this is going to look, the direction we're heading, and just get a look at the fruits of the labor, I guess you'd say. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this video, especially if you're here hanging around at the end. I appreciate it. I know this one was a little more boring than my usual videos, because it's just talking about gluing some resin parts on. But I felt like if it was something that somebody had not done before or was not comfortable with, that maybe some of the information in this would be helpful. So I hope you found it useful, maybe a little bit entertaining, just to take up some time. And if nothing else, maybe it's helped you drift off to sleep. But I do appreciate you watching. There are links down below to my social media, so if you're on one of those platforms, please connect with me there. I'd love to hear from you. And there's also a link to the subscribe button down over here, and there's a little bell icon. I'd appreciate it if you'd hit both of those, and so you'll know when I have new videos come out. And please, if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and maybe drop a comment below. That will help me out also. There's also a link down below to my Patreon campaign, so if you wanted to check that out and support me in my work, I would be very grateful for that. If you're already a Patreon supporter, thank you so much. I am so very grateful for the support you give. It truly is a blessing to me and my family, and I couldn't do what I do at the pace that I do it, with the materials and the kits and things like this resin here. I couldn't do it without your support. So thank you so very much for supporting my work. And with all that being said, I'll leave you with one final thought. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye. Sorry about that, dude.